Hello, everyone. My name is Vivian Mushahwar, and I would like to welcome all of you to this month's Smart Talks. If you are joining us for the first time, Smart Talks is a monthly seminar series of the Smart Network at the University of Alberta. And as many of you know, SMART stands for Sensory Motor Adaptive Rehabilitation Technology. We are a network of more than 200 professors and learners who have come together from many different disciplines to develop interventions that would improve quality of care and health outcomes, especially for persons experiencing neurological conditions. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's Smart Talk speaker, Dr. Marilène Oliver. Dr. Oliver is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Arts here at the University of Alberta and a principal investigator in the SMART network. She received her training in fine arts from Central St. Martin's and the Royal College of Arts, both in the UK. Her work focuses on using various image scanning technologies such as MRI, CT, and PET to, in her words, reclaim the interior of the body and allow us to materially contemplate our increasingly digitized selves. I just love this. Dr. Oliver's work has been very well received, and she has had exhibits throughout North America and Europe. She was selected to present at TEDMed in 2018 and has initiated and led the Discopia exhibit focused on the intersection of the body and technology since 2019, an exhibit that is usually available downtown, and maybe we'll hear more about that. I'm very excited to have Dr. Oliver as our Smart Talk speaker today. And just a few housekeeping notes before we start. This session is recorded. I encourage everyone to participate in the question and answer period at the end of the talk. You can ask your question yourself at the end of the talk, or write your questions in the chat during the talk, and I'll make sure that I ask your question on your behalf at the end. If you're asking your question yourself, please remember to unmute afterwards. And to preserve bandwidth, it'd be great if you can turn off your video during the talk, but then turn it back on in the question and answer session. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Dr. Oliver.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see my presentation and not my slides. Yes, great, okay. So thank you so much, Vivian, and the Smart Network for hosting me this afternoon. And also to all of you that have taken time to come to attend the presentation. I know how busy everyone is, so I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. I'm also very thankful to be speaking to you from Edmonton on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. So, as my title says, I'm going to be talking to you about my art practice and focusing on sort of more recent work, which has been on virtual reality. So using medical scan data and virtual reality to make effective artworks. But before we get to the virtual reality pieces, I'm going to start right at the beginning of when I first encountered my first sort of medically digitized body. And some of you may know this. This is the Visible Human Project. So this is way back in the late 90s. When I was doing some research for actually an undergraduate project. And the title of the project was The Virtual versus the Physical Body. And in my research, I came across this website where you had this on the left-hand side, as on this slide, you had this kind of vertical cross-section through a human body, and that you could click anywhere on it and then get this horizontal cross-section. But you could only see one cross-section at a time. And it was so powerful to me to see this body in a way that I'd never seen it, that you could see everything about this other human, but only in a very fragmented way and mediated through technology. Like this body, the visible human, had been sliced up in Maryland. And then also that in order to become this digitized data set, the subject, who was interesting in the history of anatomy, who was a convicted murderer, he was selected as someone on death row who was a perfect specimen. His body was frozen and then sliced very finely. Each slice was then photographed, digitized and uploaded. And because his body was sliced so finely, his actual body was kind of converted to mush, and all that was left was this digitized copy of him. So it was a project that really kind of fascinated me conceptually and stayed with me for a long time, so much so that then a couple of years later, as part of my thesis show for my graduate studies, I made a sculpture where I downloaded those cross sections and then printed them in silver ink onto sheets of clear acrylic, and then stacked him back up again. And it was kind of a leap of faith that this would work. But what I hadn't expected was this kind of ghostliness that would result. So you can see on the right hand side, it's kind of an optical illusion, so that when you look straight on at the sculpture, you see straight through it. It's completely hollow, but then kind of on the periphery of your vision, it volumes out, and depending on how you move around it, it kind of disappears and reappears. So this, again, very early days of the internet, and I was just kind of learning how to use it, but I kind of just accepted or assumed that if you downloaded something, if you downloaded a big file, you would have to then upload something in return. And because I was very interested in the history of anatomy and anatomical representation, I'd come across many flayed figures or écorché figures in the history of anatomy. And so in sort of to reciprocate, I digitally flayed my own skin by just using a flatbed scanner and incrementally skinning myself, and then stitched it all back together again, and made this interactive artwork, which doesn't actually exist anymore online, but existed as a website, and then also this interactive touchscreen piece. So you could sort of drag around this flayed skin with your fingers, playing with this idea of removal in time and space, similar to the I Know You Inside, I Know Every Inch of Your, sorry, I Know You Inside Out, sorry, the stacked sculpture. So these were my graduation pieces. Moving, so that the stacked sculpture piece was a very happy surprise in the way the technique worked. And when I exhibited it, somebody who was visiting was telling me that there was another technology, MRI scanning, that I could do that for living figures or real people, like living people. And straight away, my mind went to the idea of making an artwork that preserved the ones that I loved. I was kind of very interested in this idea of sort of post-humanist promise of being able to store the body and preserve it, thinking about cryogenics and the kind of post-humanist kind of literature that was around at that time. And so I was just graduating, and at that time I just sent lots of letters off to different radiology departments and asked them whether they would consider scanning my family, my immediate family, so that I could make a contemporary family portrait. And I actually got a couple of positive responses, but this is actually at the University of Nottingham answered to me first. So this is Paul Morgan and his colleague at the University of Nottingham, and this is my mother who's on the scan bed waiting to be scanned for this artwork. And as has continued on, the challenge of scanning a whole body, which for an artwork it is completely necessary, has always been a challenge. And in the early days, they put cod liver oil tablets over the surface of our bodies so that we could register the scans. Yeah, so this is my mother being scanned. And another little thing is that at that time, there were no ethics board, there was no ethics approval. We were kind of squeezed in on a Sunday afternoon. We were snuck in and scanned, and then the scans were just emailed to me. So it's also fascinating how much that has changed, all these processes. But the result was this sculptural installation. So on the left-hand side, that's my dad, then it's my mum, and then myself and my sister on the right-hand side. So again, what you're looking at are sculptures which are essentially stacks of, I think, 90 or 92 sheets of clear perspex. And on each sheet here is an axial MRI scan, or a cross-section, a horizontal cross-section MRI scan. And for this sculpture, I decided to print it in bronze ink, kind of thinking more about the classical sculpture and the idea of classical portraiture in art. So for those of you who are familiar with medical imaging, I apologize if I'm saying very obvious things, but with MRI scanning, it's quite a slow process. And at that time, the scanner, this was a 1.5 scanner, so it was quite a slow scanning process. And so we had these cross sections at every 2 centimeters, but that was all I had. I didn't have anything else. I was able to rework the data, and I made a series of other kind of sculptures using the scans. You can see on the left-hand side, this was my mother's scans revisited to kind of making a more kind of a collapsed, this is called exhausted figure. I also managed to acquire donate some PET data. My husband and I actually we did another piece of work called The Kiss. So we were scanned again using at the University of Nottingham. So I did as much as I could to work with data, but it was very hard at that time to access any. And I felt that I was constantly kind of bothering radiographers and radiologists to help me, and sort of almost scavenging for data to work with. But in one of my meetings with a radiologist, I was introduced to this software, which maybe some of you know, is called Azirix. And it was made by a research group in Switzerland. And at the time, so this is in 2007, it was open source and it could be downloaded on a Mac, which for me as an artist was kind of, it meant so much. It opened up my practice in so many ways that now suddenly I was able to work with the data myself, process it, play with it, and experiment. Plus, it had this whole repository of open source data sets. And then you can see circled, very importantly, for me, it had this full body female anonymized data set that kind of seemed to me to be like an avatar for myself. She was kind of, I think, more or less my age, more or less my size. And because of thinking about the gaming culture, this idea of having an avatar was something that we're becoming more and more familiar with, like embodying a virtual body with our own kind of identity. So it was something that I worked with a lot. And I think now I've probably made, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 artworks using that Melanix data set. Again, apologies for those that know this already, but because Melanix is a CT data set, it meant that there's so much more that I could do with it. With MRI, which is very slow, and you have to specify exactly where you want the scans to be when you acquire the data, that you can't do that much with it afterwards if you don't acquire it at a high enough resolution. Whereas CT is very fast, very high resolution, and then you post-process it. And then you decide how you want to cut it up, what kind of colors you want to put on. So it allowed me to make this quite a large body of work using her scans. So here we see a sculpture where she's made from copper. She's been etched out of copper on the left-hand side. Another sculpture where there's an axis point put through her pelvis and she's being kind of spun around that axis point. Then the data's kind of been transformed to become this kind of more the avatar. And then over towards the right, some interactive artworks where she made a piece called Melanix.execute, where she becomes an interactive video projection that can be defleshed. You can see there's a figure in the foreground. So the dancer, there's a connect which senses the movements of the dancer. And depending on how the dancer moves, Melanix will start to deflesh. She then becomes finally a skeleton that can be played with and danced with, the kind of a play on the idea of a striptease. So I think I used Melanix data a lot, as I say. And when I came to the University of Alberta, one of my main goals was to try and acquire a new data set, to try and get an MRI data set at the same kind of resolution as the Melanix data set. So that, number one, I had a data set where you can see for oncology, her arms are up. And so maybe a data set where the arms were in a more natural position, but also that I really wanted to work with virtual reality. Like, I knew that this was possible and it'd always been a dream, and so that was kind of a top goal. So soon after arriving, I tried to make as many connections as possible. I managed to reach out to the Peter Allen Scanning Centre, who was really supportive. And then I got passed around a number of different computer science professors, and finally ended up, thankfully, in Pierre's office. And I know many of you know them. I'm not sure if Pierre is here. And then I was also introduced to Kumar, Professor Kumar, Pritha Kumar, who has since become such a wonderful collaborator and has been so generous in all his knowledge. And I want to make sure that I say that none of this could be done without Kumar's expertise and everyone else in this team. So Pierre was very generous, introduced me to Kumar, and then Kumar showed me this, which is an app called the Body VR. So I went to the Kumar's lab, and we put on the headset, and then we were in this kind of spaceship where you could pick up a body data, like a part of a body, and then change the color and slice it. And it was just, yeah, a real threshold moment for me. And I'm so thankful to have been given that opportunity. It was exciting, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do was create a whole body, to have this whole body experience and to create a VR artwork with it. So we managed to do that. And the first work we made was called Deep Connection. And so also to acknowledge the huge team that helped with this, who had collaborators in radiology, so Chris Thompson and Chris Hancock and Peter Sears. And then afterwards working with it with Kumar and Pierre, and then also some interns from the computer science multimedia course, and the collaborator Gary James joined, who worked on the sound. So we did manage to acquire a full body data set. And as well as that, as well as the full body, also a 4D data set, so of movement in the body. So we acquired the heart beating and the lungs breathing, and that's very much the expertise of Richard Thompson there. So at the time that all this was happening, my mother was very ill. She had early onset Lewy body dementia, and she had pneumonia. And then I spent 2 weeks with her in the hospital, to being with her by her side, watching her chest rise and fall. And at the same time, I'd been approached by, I think, a healthcare company to talk about robotic companionship in hospitals and robotic nursing. And it really kind of made me want to make this work about that. And so the narrative of this first virtual reality piece is that as the user, you are a companion for a digitized or automated body. So I'm going to show you a quick video soon, but the idea is that you put the headset on and you see this body floating prone in front of you. You can walk around the body, you can go inside the body, and you can also hold their hand. And when you do hold their hand, then you trigger the 4D data set, which makes the heart beat and the lungs breathe. And it also triggers later this kind of morning song. So the sound is very important. So I'm just going to play this now. So the VR artwork was part of the exhibition, which Vivian mentioned earlier, Dyscorpia, Future Intersections of the Body and Technology at Enterprise Square. And I wanted the virtual artwork to be part of a sculptural installation. So when you went, this is the sculptural installation that sort of enabled the VR. So that on the outside, there are two sculptural figures made from the scan data. And inside their chest, which I'll show later, there's the sensors are embedded in them. And then the central one is kind of the guardian of the workstation. I'm just a bit conscious of time, so I might just skip this one. I'm just going to maybe just talk about some of the process about making that piece and the different stages we had to go through. So here we see this is at the Peter Allen's MR Research Center at the university. And this is where we're starting to acquire the scans. And then sort of as part of the process, so the first time we had to do the scan 3 times. The first time, because the hand, with the narrative of the hand being outstretched was so important. But the first time, the emergency button, so that if you panic or something happens, that was scanned. And so it meant that we couldn't use that data set. And then the second time, the second time in the middle, it ended up being me as the subject, but I tried to, being so worried that the hand wouldn't be scanned, I put the scan out of the my hand out of the scanning area. So again, the second data set wasn't usable. But then finally, the third time, I managed to put the hand in the right place. And also one small thing is that by flexing the feet, I was able to pass through the scanner in one go. And that also resolved some issues we had with aligning the feet. You can see in the middle, there's a problem with aligning the data. So some of the challenges we had to compile this data set was to put all the data together in a convincing way. There were overlapping blocks of data, so concatenating all that data, and then also putting the 4D data was quite challenging because of course we had to make sure all the scans, kind of the heart was beating at the right time and the chest was rising and falling at the right time. So we had kind of a number of technical challenges, and yeah, again, thanks very much to Kumar and the interns who worked on this to resolve those issues. I just want to show this slide because I think it's something. These are just the videos that make that 4D data, which I find so beautiful, and hope to make an artwork at some point to show how much everything moves inside the body as we breathe. This is just me lying in the scanner. And so although, of course, it was at the time disappointing and frustrating that the first scan didn't work, the second scan didn't work, what it afforded in the actual installation was that for these 3 figures, they're all slightly different. And these failed data sets then enable the VR, the kind of the ability to have this virtual body. And just show some details here. So here you can see on the right-hand side how that sensor is embedded inside the sculpture, which is based on the actual same MRI scan data. And what it also afforded was this accident, which is a very much part of the artistic process. Like if something goes wrong, it tends to be more interesting the thing you're actually working on, and then you get sidetracked and go and work on that. But we were using some software called 3D Slicer to sort of play around with the data sets. And for months, we'd been playing with the data prone. That was the idea. We wanted this lying down figure. And then by accident, the data was upright. And when I put the headset on it, it was really, really close to me. Plus, we had loaded 2 data sets, again, by accident, into the same space. But when you put your headset on in VR, I felt I was kind of trapped by these bodies. Plus also, there was no kind of color transform put on them. So they were just in their original kind of grayscale. And they looked like some kind of charcoal drawing. So this actually became another artwork, which was part of the Dyscorpia installation. And again, with these sculptures that enable the virtual body. I'll show you a video of what that looks like. So it feels kind of very contemporary, but also I feel quite ancient. And what was different about the 3D Slicer like being able to view the data in 3D slices, is there's an automatic clipping plane on the headset. So you kind of feel trapped. And then when you do start moving towards the figures, they kind of cut away from you, which felt very effective. And when we had it in the exhibition, it was fascinating to see people really not wanting to move, but then sort of very tentatively going in and then becoming more and more relaxed with these virtual figures. And then again, the sculptures, they look a bit different here because we've got a Vive headset. It's in blue so that it's kind of camouflaged in, and yeah, the sensor is embedded in the face. So as an artist, I kind of work in many different mediums, and the virtual reality experience have also kind of inspired these large prints. These are laser etched into graphite, and they're images from the MRI scan, from the virtual reality artwork. And I kind of created these scenarios, which are kind of like very dusty and magical, dreamlike. Hopefully they feel like that. And then also this piece, Top and Tails, where it's kind of thinking about, like, as children, if you had sleepovers, you would kind of share a bed. But in this contemporary age, I think that loneliness and isolation, especially now, as we know from the pandemic, is very much a part of our time. And so this idea of just being alone with yourself all the time, kind of being stuck in this isolated world, inspired this print. But my prints also sometimes then have now started inspiring the virtual reality artwork. So I did mention earlier that my mother had early onset Lewy body dementia. And it was, when I first started working with medical scan data, I was interested in this data because it was a digitization of the body. It wasn't so much that it was medical. But then as you get older, and of course you realize you have these experiences where this really means so much, and it completely changes your life, a scan. So when I first saw my mother's scan confirming her Lewy body diagnosis, it was, yeah, such a life-changing moment. And at that moment I saw that scan, she was also at the point she'd forgotten who I was. And so seeing that scan seemed like such an insult, that I was seeing the disease, but I wasn't seeing any memory of myself in her scans. So I've made these prints where I'm now putting my memories of my mother into her scans. So you can see this image, there's lots of lines there, it's a bit small, but it's all text inside there. And that has influenced this other virtual, these are kind of sketches, but I wanted to put them in because they're informing some other projects. So here we had, this is now the brain is, this is in virtual reality again, and the head is very big. So you go in, it's like as big as a full-size human, and you can go inside the brain. And then activate these cross sections, which are made up of memories. Sorry. And then this is another virtual reality artwork. This is made using Google Tilt Brush. If you don't know it, it's a virtual reality app which allows you to kind of draw and sculpt in virtual reality. And this was something I did early on in the first coronavirus lockdown, which was kind of play in this. And I made this kind of, again, like a pod that you could go inside and kind of escape from the realities of coronavirus. What I actually found myself doing once I'd made this pod was thinking about what it would have been like if my mother was still alive at this time. She would have, having dementia, she would have been incredibly confused by what was happening, found the masks really upsetting, I know, and then of course she would have been isolated. It would have been, I just can't imagine how hard it must be for people in that situation right now. So inside this pod is kind of this space where you dare to think these really, really dark, difficult thoughts. So I'm probably quite hard to see that, but there's kind of text inside here. Okay, so now just for the last sort of 10 minutes of the talk, I'm going to talk to you about some current research projects. So I've now managed to finally secure some funding to work on these projects in a more interdisciplinary way. Managed to get some funding from KIAS to have a large interdisciplinary project where we have lots of partners, many people, I think some people are here today, and many are part of the SMART network, but it's really exciting to be able to work across disciplines on this project. Because one thing that I realized by making Deep Connection and Space Invaders, how much work of virtuality work is happening at the university, but we don't really have a space to share it. Unfortunately now, because we're also isolated, we still don't really have a space to share it, but we have this group, and we have, just to say that some activities that we're doing, we started off by having a series of just research presentations where we're just sharing our research. We're also doing a literature review of existing VR apps made with medical scan data and other artworks which are relevant to the project. And we're working on 2 new VR projects, which I'll show you in a minute. And importantly, so I said before about Osiris, that open source software. If that had not existed, I would not be here now. And I'm so thankful to open source software. I really, really believe it, and I really want to give back to that community. So we are part of the project is to make some more software tools, some more open source software tools for Unity, which is the gaming platform, and also 3D Slicer, which has the VR capability, but with very little functionality, and then a series of open access educational resources that could be for everyone, could be for students, could be for medical practitioners, anyone could use it. But if you make that kind of software, you have to also think about, what does it mean? What are the ethics? What do we need to think about? We need to be so aware about data privacy, and what we do with that kind of data. And then finally, next year, we'll see what happens, but we're hoping either to have, or both, to have a VR exhibition made using these tools at the Museum of Other Realities, and hopefully a real life exhibition next year. So the works that we're working on at the moment, one is called My Data Body, which really thinks about what can you do with your own data? Like what data do we generate? We're all being told we all have all this data, but what is our data body? So that's the first piece, and it's based on, we're using a number of different tools. We're using Unity, the scan data, and also using, excitingly, Jeffrey Rockwell's Voyant tools, which allows you to scrape data from websites. So it recreates, reusing the data, the first original scan data set, but thinking of the body as a data processing site. I think we're all very familiar with this, that we could just be like, basically what we do, we're just like moving data around. So start off with, it's inside this data cloud, which is generated, this is from all my Facebook data, using Jeffrey Rockwell's tools. We've made this cloud, which, so the terms that are most common in my Facebook data set are the larger ones. The ones that are least common are the smaller ones. And then inside the body, translating different cross sections in different directions into text. So you get these kind of data slices. I'm conscious of time, so I might just sneak through this a little bit, but you can pull these slices out.
Marilyn, you're good. Don't worry.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. I see my time.
You still have 14 minutes or so.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, maybe I'll relax a bit. Yeah. And so the logic is that I'm putting my Mac terminal data into my bones. I'm putting my Google data into my muscle and organs. And then into my fat area, I'm putting all my Facebook data. And it's been really interesting to do this. Like, I thought I knew what my data was, but a lot of it is about what I look for, what I search for. So this really long, so this kind of real kind of research creation project where you just actually really do what you're thinking about doing, you discover new things. And then here now, when you go inside the body, There are organs that you can pull out, which is going to happen in a minute. So you can pull out the heart. And it's going to happen now. Yeah. And a bit like in that project I showed you with the tilt brush, you can draw emoticons. So you can kind of draw with these emojis. And then in the brain, I think my brain, the only thing I need my brain for these days is to remember my passwords and my logins. Everything else can take care of itself. So yeah, you can kind of draw with these passwords and logins. And then finally here we see flowing through veins and arteries, again, is this call for a login and a password. So this is just at a beta stage, and I'm hoping, so Ewan Lavoie, I'm hoping passing that on to Ewan next, hoping that Ewan, who works with Craig, maybe be able to do something with gamma. And because as well as the data body here, when you're in VR, now Oculus has the rights to your biometric data from the VR headset. So they're collecting how you move, your height. So hoping maybe we can input some of this data into this project. And then your data body. Now, I'm a bit nervous sharing this, especially with kind of the ethics that I'm kind of talking about. But here we're thinking about what can you do with the data of others? What right do you have? What is open source data? Just because it's open source, should you use it? How should you use it? Interestingly, in medical scanning, how is data anonymized? So now that data is such high resolution, you can definitely recognize someone from it. But what are those anonymization protocols? Defacing data is something that happens. So you just cut the face off, but that's really like shocking for someone who doesn't understand what it is. And then interestingly, I think also the question of, do people care? Like, does it matter? I think these are really important discussions to have. So yeah, this is very new. So in your data body, you put the headset on and you're in this kind of almost like a cupboard full of these data parts. And you'll see in a minute, you can pick them up. You can adjust. We've managed to now, thanks to Walter Ostrander, who's the current RA on this, you can change the color, you can resize it.
Subjects from the National Cancer Institute's Clinical Proteomic Tumor Analysis Consortium Head and Neck Cancer. TAC-HMSCC cohort. TAC is the national effort to accelerate the understanding of the molecular basis.
But as you just heard, whenever you pick up a data set, you get this automated, if it's open source, you get an automated voice reading the information that's released with that data set.
Subjects from the National Cancer Institute's Clinical Proteomic Tumor Analysis Consortium Head and Neck Cancer.
But the instinct, I think, is to make this kind of Frankenstein figure. And then long term, I'm hoping to have donated data where we have different kinds of audio put onto it.
Computed tomography, PET/CT, 18FM.
This collection contains subjects from the National Cancer Institute's Clinical Proteomic Tumor Analysis. This collection contains subjects from the National Cancer Institute's effort to accelerate.
Yeah, I said sorry. And so we have now managed, but just this week managed to have it so that you could also adjust the color and change the scale. Yeah, so that's where we are with the research creation projects. As I mentioned earlier, we are now planning an ethics symposium in the spring, and we would love if anybody who's here would like to attend. It'd be wonderful to have you. We really want people who are kind of real stakeholders in this area to attend. And then so we're aiming to launch the software tools, which I see a great relevance for students and for people who are teaching medical imaging, but also perhaps also in patient care, and of course for artists as well. And then yes, the exhibition next year. So thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry it went on so long, but hopefully we have a little bit more time for some questions. I got to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. You did not go over time. This was perfect and super interesting. Okay, let me see if there are. Okay, so I'm getting in chat all the expressions of greatness and excitement. But while people formulate questions, I have a few. I mean, this was just absolutely fascinating and allowing me to start thinking of possibilities. So here are some of the things that I've written down, but they're not necessarily in any particular order of priority. So you mentioned the medical students, right? And people in the medical field that need to be so familiar with anatomy. How do you how do you translate this to them? How do you put it in a form that becomes readily available for them to use? And what would be your goals for learning? What kind of information would you like to impart?
So in a very practical sense, the software that we used to start off with was called 3D Slicer. And it is an open source radiology platform that a lot of people are already using. And it has so many tools in it for working with scan data. And at the moment, the plugin that they have is great, but all you can do is put the headset on, say all, it's pretty amazing. You put the headset on and you can see your data. Right. You can't, at the moment, have any sound embedded. You can't do any annotation on the scans. You can't change the color when you're inside. You can't crop the data. And that would be a goal, that's the main goal, is to extend that plugin so that you have all those functionalities so that anyone could use that. And that, so that's where I'm hoping that it could be possible to use it. And I could see it being sort of a project for students to do, is to make a VR app to explain their understanding of anatomy, to add sound, to add annotation, and perhaps the drawn elements. It's possible, very possible. We just need to collide some different softwares together.
Yeah, I can see how that would just so much enhance the learning experience. You know, I took a lot of anatomy, neuroanatomy, and human anatomy. I would have loved a tool like that to, to put things more in perspective, right? And be able to interact with them. So that would be absolutely fabulous. But the other thing that my mind went to is kind of mental health, right? You know, you talked about mourning and grieving, right? And of course, isolation, right? Especially in the age of the pandemic. The question that I had for you is, can this become personalized? So obviously you showed us the cross section of your mom's brain with the words that you associated with memories with her, and I'm sure that was just huge amounts of effort, but I could see how how soothing and how that would be for a person who's grieving. How could that become available to others? Like, what can they do to utilize scans in such a way that would be therapeutic from that perspective?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of a question I've been asking with my work all the way along. And a lot of this came, I won't deny it, is because I have because my mother is French. And so in France, you automatically are the custodian of your data. You are responsible for your data. You get given the scans. Right. And so it was seeing my mum's scans in virtual reality was really like, You know, you could see the angle of her ear and just remember that angle of the nose, and it was really powerful, almost too powerful. Yeah, but this data exists, huh? And we have to be aware of that and realize that this is going to be more and more what people maybe will do is revisit that scan data. And so, yeah, this is a question: should we be making tools to make that more accessible for people so that they could go into virtual reality and be with?
Yeah.
It's not. It's like a photograph, but it's 3D and it's so powerful. In virtual reality, your body is the interface with the data. Like you you decide at what angle you approach it, and it's very emotive, very powerful.
Yeah. And you can create avatars that are, just so realistic, of your family, right? Or of anyone that you may want to interact with, if these data are available, I guess. But that's when you get into the question of ethics, and I can see how that becomes a very critical component.
Yeah. I do find myself really struggling, like yesterday I almost had like a panic attack thinking, what am I doing? What are we doing with this data body project? I don't know who these people are, and I'm putting them in this kind of weird scenario of a shelf. Is that really disrespectful? Should I not be doing it? But then at the same time, I think I want to make sure everyone's aware that this is possible. You can do it. Right. So I fully agree. It's a very challenging area to be working in, and I also I'm troubled by it. Very troubled by it.
Yeah. One thing that struck me, and I don't know if this was your intent at all. Probably not. But I looked at the human body, the way you're storing data, and I'm thinking that's going to be an amazing filing cabinet. So how do you do that? Like, does each pixel associate with or voxel associate with a piece of data, or how do you transfer the human body into a data storage system the way you had done it?
That's made in Unity, which is a gaming platform. So this has been really important to us to be able, and this is very much thanks to Kumar and all the other interns that are working on it, is to import this data into this gaming software where you can put 3D models, you have all this interaction capability that's been developed for gaming. So thanks to that software, you have all these abilities to place things and create worlds for them to exist in. And we're learning from that to identify what tools do we then want to recreate in 3D Slicer. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. I see.
It could be, I'm sure the Body VR app and the medical holodeck people what they've created is also really fascinating and powerful. I'm hoping we can invite them to speak as part of the Know Thyself project to understand how they're doing it. I'm sure they must be able to access different data sets within VR. So there are capabilities of doing that. Yeah, but like you can see that as if you had longitudinal scans in VR, that it could be really great. It would be very, very helpful to see that. Something we're also hoping to work on, which Walter is currently going to be working on, is changing the intensity values in the scans rather than a color or a transparency value to an audio pitch value. And that, because I think there's so much data in there that maybe you could do it, there may be things with sound that you can identify that maybe you can't see visually because there's too many other pixels or voxels in the way.
Right. Wow. That would be amazing. I'm gonna keep asking my questions. Sorry. I hope everyone is hanging in there. So I'm thinking they were as fascinated with the talk as I was. But one thing that I guess I'm trying to get your view as an artist. So you had the 3D scans, and you had them such that you get the very contemporary feel, but also the ancient feel. First of all, how did you do that? And what were your thoughts? What was your, I guess, intent when you did that?
Is that the sculptures, like the early sculptures, or the later?
Early sculptures, yeah. The early sculptures, when you started doing the scanning, the MRI, and you were able to kind of transition between traditional kind of ancient features and then very contemporary representation.
Yeah. So in the beginning and still now, very interested in process. So, and to expose process and expose form. So like, what is it that happens in MRI and CT to allow the body to be digitized, and how to expose that? And so those sculptures with that very rigid form where everything is completely lined up beautifully, like perfectly, very cleanly. And then with this spacing, to expose that spacing is absolutely like crucial to the artwork, because it's exposing like what needs to happen in order to be able to digitize something.
Right.
And then by choosing these materials, so the bronze ink or the silver ink, was kind of putting then these works in a lineage of art history where these are the materials that have traditionally been used for portraiture. And so to recall that, to think about how it shifts. So the material kind of still bronze. We're still creating representation from bronze, but there's so much that is lost. It's empty.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. You mentioned challenges with MRI, and you did you so there were the challenges with the positioning, right? With the panic ball, I guess, and how the feet were and what have you. But what do you think maybe other challenges? Simply, I guess the reason I'm asking is, and that's just my lack of knowledge, but my experience with MRI is that you can see a whole lot more on the inside than maybe you could see with some of the other imaging modalities, just because of the beautiful contrast between the different tissue types. But that's not necessarily your interest, or how does so what would make MRI more challenging than CT scan? Is it just the way you process the data afterwards and the software that's available for that, or is it what you're looking for as an artist?
I'm fascinated with the fact that what MRI does is that it images water.
Yeah.
So it images a wet body.
Right.
And CT images density.
Right.
So it's images a dry body.
Right.
So I'm really interested in that.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it.
And then with MRI, you can scan. You can do non-clinical scans for research. So I can scan known subjects.
Right.
Whereas with CT, I wouldn't be. You can't do that because of
radiation.
The radiation, yeah. Plus, what's interesting about MRI compared to CT is that MRI is noisy, so you have that artifact.
Right.
And it's just an aesthetic. It's like another trace of the presence of the subject as being a living entity. So one thing that was really interesting in the family portrait scans, and I don't know, like I think this is interesting, and I've been told it's not really real, but like everybody's heartbeat artifact was different. And then I could tell the scans just from the heartbeat artifact. And I find that really interesting, that we could just the energy or how we affect the voxels around the body. I'm also very intrigued by.
That is fascinating. There's a question from Deepa who is thanking you for a fascinating presentation. And the question is, have you ever used diffusion MRI data sets for viewing the white matter fiber representations? I think it would be very interesting and useful to view those in VR. So really now tracking those connections in the nervous system with the white matter tracks.
No, I haven't, and it would be great to. I think now we're ready. I think now, we've kind of been working with, okay, the MRI works, the CT works, and now I think we can start trying some different data sets in the VR. That would be wonderful to see it, and it would be spectacular, I'm sure. I've also been told about resting state fMRI.
Right.
Love to be able to do that. I think it would be really powerful as well.
Right.
So there's so exciting. There's so many things we could do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how when we do MRIs, we pay $500 an hour. It's a bit crazy. It's an expensive imaging modality. But the question is, what do you need? Like, I guess the funding becomes quite a question, but are you able to say, look, I'm going to include $500, $550, I guess these days, for a scan? How does that work? And how does it work with the funding agency that you currently have funding from? And congratulations on that funding.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, we pay the same amounts per hour. And that's also a question of then, do we need to be acquiring more data? Do I need to be using the scanner? Because there are so many scan data sets out there. That's also like, do I need to acquire new data? But it was really important for that full body MRI, because didn't know if we could do that. And then, as far as I know, I still don't think there is a full body MRI data set that's open source. So that kind of felt like, but yeah, that's part of the thing that's written into the grant, is that number of the scanning hours and doing that. It would be great to get some more bodies for sure, like different kinds of bodies and in different positions. And
right.
Yeah, you can imagine a project of articulating a scanned body as well.
Oh yeah, wow, that would be absolutely gorgeous. Man, this is absolutely fascinating. We're really coming to the end, Marilène. Thank you so much. I enjoyed this and learned so much. So thanks for taking the time to present today, and I'm sure this was fascinating to everyone. And I thank everyone for joining us, and invite you to next month's Smart Talks, which will be announced fairly soon. Thank you very much, Marilène.
Thank you. And as I say one more time, thank you to everyone who's been so generous and has helped me so much in the project and is involved in all these projects, because there's no way it's just me. There's a huge team that have contributed to all this. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It's always a great team. Yeah. And thank you so much, Marilène.
Okay. Have a great afternoon. Good reading week, everyone.
See you guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.